Imagine driving into a beautiful American neighborhood. Perfect lawns, palm trees, golf carts parked in almost every driveway. Everything feels peaceful. Then you notice something strange. No playgrounds, no school buses, no kids riding bikes after school. That's not a coincidence. Across the United States, there are more than 2,000 neighborhoods designed almost entirely for people over the age of 55. And instead of avoiding them, millions of Americans are trying to move in. But why? To understand why, you first have to understand what these communities actually are. If you've never lived in the US, there's a good chance you've never even heard of these communities. They rarely make international news, but domestically, they're a massive part of American life. Some are small, just a few hundred homes tucked behind a single gate. Others are practically their own cities, with their own zip codes, their own newspapers, even their own radio stations. The most famous of all is The Villages in Central Florida. The community itself is home to roughly 85,000 people. But once you count the surrounding towns it has absorbed over the years, that number climbs toward 150,000, making it, by some measures, one of the fastest growing metro areas in the entire country. The median age here is over 70. And in some neighborhoods, this isn't an exaggeration. There are genuinely more golf carts registered than actual cars. Locals don't drive to the pharmacy. They putter over in a cart with a custom paint job and a cup holder for their coffee. For a lot of people watching this from outside the US, that image alone sounds almost like a joke. But for a huge number of Americans, it isn't a punchline at all. It's the dream they've been saving for their entire working life. So the real question is this: why would anyone deliberately choose a neighborhood with no children, no schools, and no families when they could live almost anywhere else? To answer that, you have to rewind to just after World War II. Americans, for the first time in history, started living significantly longer. Medicine improved, pensions became common, and a generation that had spent decades working long hours suddenly found itself with 10, 20, sometimes 30 extra years of healthy life after retirement. That created a problem nobody had really planned for. What do you do with all that time? Developers noticed something interesting. Retirees weren't chasing the same things as young families buying their first home. They weren't shopping for the biggest house on the block or worrying about which street had the best school district. What they actually wanted looked completely different. Lower maintenance, no more weekends spent fixing a leaking roof. Safety, quiet streets, low crime, people who looked out for each other. Neighbors going through the exact same stage of life, not the chaos of school pickup lines and teenage curfews, and activities built around their own schedule, not a school calendar or a 9-to-5 job. The first big experiment was a place called Sun City, Arizona, built in the early 1960s. It was marketed almost like a resort. Golf courses, clubhouses, a promise that retirement didn't have to mean slowing down. It sold out almost immediately. And that's the key thing to understand here. This was never really about excluding children out of spite. It was about builders realizing that a 68-year-old and a 34-year-old raising toddlers are, in almost every practical way, looking for two completely different neighborhoods. So what does an ordinary Tuesday actually look like inside one of these communities? Mornings start early. Golf courses fill up before most office workers have even poured their first cup of coffee. Pickleball courts, now one of the fastest growing sports in America, are booked solid by 7 a.m., with lines of players waiting for the next open court. Swimming pools open before sunrise for lap swimmers. Fitness centers run full class schedules. Yoga, water aerobics, strength training, often with wait lists. Then there are the clubs. Some of these communities run literally hundreds of them. Photography clubs that meet for weekly shoots, ballroom dancing lessons 3 nights a week, woodworking shops full of retired engineers building furniture for their grandkids, garden clubs trading tomato seedlings, book clubs so popular they've split into multiple chapters just to fit everyone in. Restaurants, medical clinics, pharmacies, even full grocery stores, all built close enough to reach by golf cart, so residents genuinely never have to get on a highway if they don't want to. And in the evenings, live music. Almost every single night, somewhere in the community, there's a band playing on an outdoor stage with hundreds of residents dancing in lawn chairs they've brought from home. The goal here was never simply retirement in the old sense, sitting quietly on a porch. It was replacing a career with a full calendar, trading a job for a community that never really lets you get bored. And that same idea, a life built entirely around this one age group, is exactly what leads to the part of this story that catches most outsiders completely off guard. Here's where things get interesting. Grandchildren are allowed to visit. In most communities, they can even stay for a few weeks at a time. Long summer visits are common and, honestly, encouraged. But in the vast majority of these neighborhoods, those same grandchildren legally cannot move in and live there full time. Not temporarily bending a rule, legally cannot. Why? Because of a piece of U.S. federal law called the Housing for Older Persons Act. Under this law, a community can officially register itself as 55-plus housing, and once it does, it's granted a legal exemption to restrict long-term residency for families with children under 18. The only requirement is that at least 80% of the homes have someone 55 or older permanently living in them. That one rule is the entire legal foundation this whole lifestyle is built on. On top of that federal rule, there's almost always a homeowners association layering on its own detailed regulations, quiet hours after 10 p.m., strict standards for how your lawn has to look, and yes, actual posted speed limits for golf carts on the internal roads. Some residents genuinely love this level of structure. It's predictable. Everyone who moved in signed up for the exact same deal, so there's rarely any conflict over whether a neighbor's dog barks too much or their lawn is too long. Others find it stifling too many rules for what's supposed to be their relaxed, easygoing retirement. But here's the twist almost nobody expects when they first hear about these places, and it's the detail that completely changes how you should picture them. We'll get to that in a moment. Let's be fair here, because this is not a lifestyle everyone signs up for happily. Critics raise some real, valid concerns. Life inside a highly structured, single-age community can start to feel repetitive after a few years. The same clubs, the same faces, the same routines on a loop. HOA fees add up fast, sometimes running into the hundreds of dollars every single month on top of the mortgage or rent. And there's very little age diversity by design, which critics argue also tends to mean very little diversity of any kind, since these communities skew heavily toward a narrow slice of American demographics. Supporters push back just as hard and just as loudly. It's peaceful, they say. It's genuinely safer. Crime rates in most of these communities are far below the national average. And more than anything, it's social, often dramatically more social than their working years ever were. In fact, survey after survey of residents turns up the same surprising result. A lot of people say they have a fuller, busier social calendar in their 70s than they ever had while holding down a full-time job and raising kids. To anyone watching this from outside the United States, the whole concept can sound almost unbelievable. An entire neighborhood, sometimes an entire town, built for one narrow age group. But here's what actually surprised me the most while digging into this. These communities are, in a strange way, getting younger. The entry age in most of them is just 55, and a huge share of new arrivals these days are still in genuinely great shape, working out daily, playing pickleball at sunrise before it gets too hot, biking for miles along the community trails, out at a concert or a club meeting most nights of the week. So when first-time visitors roll in, expecting something that looks like a nursing home, what they actually find is something else entirely. A place that looks a lot more like a massive, permanent vacation resort than anywhere designed for slowing down. And that's really why these communities keep expanding every single year, adding thousands of new homes annually. Not because Americans dislike children, and not because anyone here is trying to shut families out of their lives. It's because after decades of raising kids and building a career, a huge number of people simply want their next chapter surrounded by others living through that exact same chapter at the exact same time. And maybe that's the most American part of this whole story. Instead of settling on one single definition of the perfect neighborhood, America just keeps building different ones for every different stage of life.